How you doing there, little guy? Hey, buddy. Hey, welcome back, folks, to Max Nave Horsemanship. In my last video, I said I wasn't going to talk anymore about boarding and leasing, but I also said at the end of that one, that all depends on what people have to say on the subject. Actually, there was a couple of comments that are worth addressing, and I'm going to talk about them, but just briefly, because I'm going to talk about a bunch of other stuff too. And one of the things I'll talk about is your attitude in general towards horsemanship. And I just want to give you a little example, because this is something that can happen in life, not just with your horses, but it definitely applies to the horse as well. Basically, you get what you give. And every single religion and culture in the world has got a similar saying that, you reap what you sow, you get what you give, what goes around comes around, things like that. There's many variations, but it all boils down to the same thing. And, even with horses, some people will say that horses mirror you, so that, you can tell the personality of the owner by how the horse behaves. And this is kind of something I want to talk about, because the principle here applies to everything in life, and I want to give you a little example of something that happened to me. Is I made a deal with a horse. As many of you know that have been watching my videos, I had one for sale. I did sell it, and I make every effort to make my dealings with people as fair and reasonable as possible, not unlike how I deal with the horses. And, well, I must have done something right, too, because not only did they pay for the horse, but they also gave me a little gift, and it was a little tool set. I'm not going to elaborate on exactly what it was or anything, because a lot of you aren't going to have a clue what I'm talking about, but it was a very high-quality one, and it was a very good set. It actually had components in it that I don't even own, and I've been buying tools since I was 12 years old, so that says something. If there's stuff in there I don't already have. Wonderful thing, and I really appreciate it. It's a beautiful little set. At least I'd like to believe this is why I got it, is because of how I dealt with them in the transaction. Is I did my level best to make things work out, and I think in the end it's kind of a win-win for a lot of people and the horse in what we came up with. So you get what you give, honestly, you do. And that's just something that I want to talk about briefly. I'll elaborate on that in a minute. But I want to go back to the leasing and boarding thing. Is somebody, I'll start with the one that's a little different, is that they'd been taking lessons for quite a while, and where they live, it's predominantly English riding, very little Western. And they're all into, performance horses, jumpers, and, stuff like that. Which in some places is quite common. You don't ride a horse unless you can compete. And while I don't necessarily think that's the way it needs to be done, and a lot of people kind of attribute, they kind of connect Western style of riding and trail riding as being, if you're going to trail ride, you should be Western riding. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because there's not a huge difference between Western and English. There are some differences, but largely it's just, the saddle looks a lot different. And personally, my preference is the Western saddle. It's more utilitarian. You can do more things with it as far as work. It's like the difference between a sports car and a pickup truck, really, in my opinion. But this one lady, she was saying, I really want to go trail riding, but, they do English discipline. And, well, you know what? I'm in Canada, in North America, and most people do Western. But where I'm boarding here, in this facility, there's actually quite a few people that ride English, and those people also do trail riding. In fact, that's all they do is trail riding in English saddles. So just because your lessons confine you to doing English riding doesn't mean you can't go trail riding. Depending on where you live, there aren't many trails to ride on, not many places where you can, as they say in some countries, go hack out, go for a ride. It's a little more difficult to find places where you can. And, this, of course, goes back to, ownership of a horse and the things that you can do. Is they made a good point, is they said, yeah, I can you know, get a tow vehicle and a trailer, but depending on what you already own, that could mean buying a second vehicle and buying a trailer. Both of those can be quite costly if you want decent ones. So, you know, you might have to just, are you willing to settle for what you got? You know, just spending time with the horse, riding around the arena or in the yard or whatever, you know, sometimes that can be pretty satisfying too. So, you know, don't think that because your lessons have been exclusively English and most of the horses around there are trained for jumping or something, don't think that you can't enjoy yourself. You know, you can either find alternative ways of getting to do what you want to do or just enjoy what you got. And, you know, like I said, the more I get to know horses, the less I care if I even get on them. So it's possible to really satisfy yourself simply by just being with the horse. You know, you don't have to be doing a certain discipline or going to a certain place. You know, that stuff is not mandatory. Now, that was one of the comments. Another one was somebody that had actually leased out horses. And they kind of had bad experiences. And in a way, this goes back to, you know, what I talked about in the very beginning, where I said, you know, when I'm making deals with people and treating other people, you know, I want to give the same respect I expect to get. And it kind of goes back to like the golden rule thing is like, you know, treat others as you would expect to be treated. And when you're doing business, if you lease in a horse, remember, that's not your horse. And the other person expects you to treat it appropriately. And they had a couple of bad experiences with horses they'd leased out. And, you know, one was, it was just an unfortunate thing. The horse ended up with a muscle injury that, in spite of all the best efforts of the vet and the person that had leased the horse and everything else, they missed the problem, and now they have a pasture ornament. It's not really rideable. But reality is, if you lease out a horse, that can happen. But then again, that could also happen if you own the horse and it never goes anywhere. It could still happen. So it's just the reality of horse ownership is bad things can happen. That's just a given, unfortunately. But be prepared. That's one more thing that, you know, you may end up with huge vet bills. You may end up with, you know, time that the horse can't be ridden while it's healing up. You may end up with a horse that is never ever going to be rideable again. That's one of the sad realities. Now, that is one of the stories that they shared. Another one was about a horse that got treated okay, but when it went out, it came back considerably underweight, which wasn't entirely the fault of the person that leased the horse, because this kind of connects to the boarding, because when they leased the horse, they kept it at a boarding facility. And this is something where I've said there's a lot of variations, and around here I don't know of any that do things this way, but I don't know that much. I just know where I am, how things are done here mostly. And you know, I've heard stories of various kinds where you actually have to go out and feed the horse on a daily basis, which could be very inconvenient, because this is something I want to talk about, is the horse digestive system. Having them fed a certain amount per day or at certain times of the day, only a couple times a day, is not good for the horse. It's not healthy in many respects, because this is where I want to talk about how the horse digestive system works. And this is important stuff to know because it can prevent problems. Because one of the many common problems is horses that get ulcers. And the reason that horses often get ulcers is that their digestive system doesn't work like ours. The human digestive system, when we eat something, our stomach produces acids in accordance to the amount that we're eating, if everything's working right. Occasionally there's problems, but typically if the system's working right, your stomach's going to produce acid as you eat. So you have the amount of acid necessary for the amount of food you've eaten. With a horse, it doesn't work that way. Their stomachs produce acid nonstop at the same rate all the time. And that's why if you pay attention to what horses do when they're left alone to do their own thing, is they will eat pretty much nonstop all day. Well, not quite, but pretty close. They eat a lot all day long because they need a constant, steady intake of food to compensate for the constant production of acid in their stomach. And if they don't get free food, as we have here, there's, you know, grazing, as well as there's some hay put out, more so in the wintertime. And, you know, that allows them to eat whenever they need to. And that can really prevent a lot of problems. I've been here now for about 7 years, have yet to see a horse with an ulcer because of that. So, and none of them are skinny either, except well, there's actually a couple that are a little thin right now, but they got other health problems that's causing that. But on the note of weight, now this is something that I want to show you something that I think absolutely every person should own. If you got a horse, you should own one of these things. And they're not expensive either, and I got it in my pocket. In fact, it's that small, you can carry it around, you can pack it anywhere you want. It's tape, and they're made specifically, you could use an ordinary tape measure or cloth type tape for doing this, but this one is made specifically for horses. On one side, you can use it to measure the height of the horse if you want to know how many hands high the horse is, and depending on how you're looking at it, might not be horribly accurate, but yeah, it'll give you a good idea. And the other side is got weight on it, and you wrap it around the horse, and by wrapping it around, and there's actually a formula for doing it with a regular tape measure on how many inches equals how many pounds. Now, one of these things is like $5. I don't know, maybe a little more now, but that depends on where you live too. Again, you might be able to get it a lot cheaper. In fact, you know, some places you might be able to pick up one of these things for $3. Maybe they're up to $10 now in some places. I don't know, but it's one of those things that's not horribly expensive, and it is very important for monitoring the condition of your horse, because what this does, although the weights might not be terribly accurate on it as far as how much the horse actually weighs, it will tell you if the horse's weight is going up or down. Now, in the case of the one that was leased out, it was at a boarding facility where they decided, I don't know, maybe they made a mistake, or I don't know what the whole story is. You know, I'm sure there's more to the story, but the horse, bottom line was, it didn't get fed enough for the level of activity and the size of the horse, and the horse ended up losing a lot of weight. Now, if the person leasing the horse had gone out and bought one of these things, they could have monitored that and said something to the barn owner as soon as they noticed that the horse's weight was going down, and they could have said, hey, excuse me, this horse needs more feed. You got to give it more hay because it's losing weight, and that's not acceptable. And that's a case of, you know, dealing with other people, their property. You want to be respectful and give them a good deal. And it goes both ways too. No matter what side of the fence you're on, you want to be as fair as possible and respectful as possible to the other individual when you're doing business. And the same goes with horses. Now, I've said that before many times, actually, is that you get what you give. And, you know, pretty much all the horses here know me, and they know how I treat spring. When it got warm, we had to take blankets off. There were two different individuals, couldn't get near the horses. I had to, but the horses knew me well enough. They trusted me. I could walk right up to them, take their blankets off without a problem. Now, how did that happen? Well, just like doing business, you being fair. You know, you get what you give. You know, so I gave to those horses fairness, and I was trustworthy to them, where they didn't fear me. And so I had no problem approaching them and doing things with them that even their owners couldn't do. Get what you give. You know, if you're fair to those horses, oh, they've all disappeared. There was a whole bunch there a minute ago. They're around the corner hiding in the shade. They're smart. So you don't ever underestimate the intelligence of a horse. Those guys are smart. They're standing in the shade. They're not standing in the sun, because it's actually not that warm out today, but that sun is hot. Man, dressed the way I am, I'm actually pretty warm standing out here in the sun, but if I step inside the arena into the shade, it's actually cool in there. Huge difference, but anyhow. So, you know, be fair to people. You know, respect their property, take care of it as best you can. The incidents that I was told about that were rather negative ones, you know, if you spend $5 on one of these things, the underweight thing, that could have been prevented, because you would have caught it. And that's what I say, you know, it may not accurately tell you what the weight of the horse is, but it will tell you if it's gaining or losing, and that's the important part, is you need to know, is it going up or down? You know, whether or not it's actually, you know, 1,100 pounds or 1,135 or whatever, you know, that's kind of irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is whether it's going up or down, because that tells you whether or not you got a problem with, you know, and that can not only tell you if there's a problem with feed, but it can also tell you if there's a problem with the health of the horse too, because if it's still getting the same amount of feed and all of a sudden the weight starts dropping, you better start looking at other issues too, and that can, you know, like I said, prevent problems. Don't wait until the horse is on death's door to do something about it. And one of these cheap little things can really help you out in that regard. So just thought I'd talk about that stuff. Being fair, you get what you give. You know, same when you're making lease agreements, and same with boarding. You know, be thorough. You know, when you're asking your 100 questions that I mentioned, you know, ask as much as you can. Find out, you know, do these people really know? Because just because they got, you know, they're boarding horses and they got, you know, 50 horses around, doesn't necessarily mean they know what's best. And sometimes you have to step up and say, excuse me, but this isn't acceptable. We need to improve this situation. Can we please do something about it? And you know, maybe say something nice like, hey, what can I do? How can I help this situation? What can I do, you know, to help you out, you know, to make things a little bit easier? And I'll go back to the box stall thing too. I mentioned that too. You know, when it comes to boarding, if at all possible, don't use box stalls. I realize that in some places, land is at a premium. A lot of boarding facilities do not have adequate pasture for the horses to just out and run around in. And they end up in box stalls with small turnout areas. And that's when they get fed a rationed amount. And the next thing you know, they are getting too much or not enough, and you have problems. But that's where it's up to you to, you know, keep tabs on them and, you know, find out exactly, well, you're responsible for the horse. Take care of it, okay? Have a good day.